I am absolutely delighted that we have Alan Gilmer tonight. Alan, let me tell you a little bit about him. Prior to co-founding Drillinginfo in 1999, Alan was an independent oil man for 7 years, co-founding 3 profitable E&P companies. He began his oil patch career with Marathon Oil Corporation as a geophysicist working in research, seismic acquisitions, and South American exploration. Alan is active in all aspects of Drillinginfo's new product development and is widely recognized for his industry leadership and vision. He holds several patents in the field of multi-component seismology. He received his BA in geology from Rice University and his MS in geology from the University of Texas at El Paso. What's not on his bio is he's very modest, but in 2014 he won the Best CEO Award for a large company here in Austin from the Austin Business Journal. In 2002 he won the Entrepreneur of the Year Award for Central Texas, and in many other award categories for his industry, he's been widely recognized for his achievements. So I'm very fortunate to have Alan with us tonight. Alan, welcome.
Thank you, Laura.
Please, let's...
Thanks.
Alan, tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial background.
Well, I think in my case, entrepreneurialism meant I wasn't really hireable very well. I worked for Marathon Oil Company as a wonderful oil company. It was headquartered in Ohio, Findlay, Ohio, and very kind of staid and Midwestern in its demeanor. And I think I was there for 6 wonderful years. They gave me a lot of opportunity. They gave me a lot of rope, and I was young and not very politic. And in fact, I ran into my old boss a couple years ago, and I apologized to him for being such a horrible employee. But I just never did what I was supposed to do all the time. So it was I had always wanted to go out on my own. And I think it was when I was in college. I went to college at Rice University. I was going to go there to be a lawyer. And I decided after my freshman year that political science, I didn't really understand it. The philosophy courses I was taking were making me bleed from the ears. I just wasn't smart enough for any of that stuff. And I was taking rocks for jocks to get my science out of the way. And my professor at Inks Lake, we had a field trip, and he really impressed me because he drank a bottle of Jack Daniels, and he passed out with his boots in the fire. And I thought to myself at that moment, I can do this. I really have this. This is in my playbook. Of course, if you are a geologist, you realize they sucker you in with this easy, fun stuff with fossils and dinosaurs the first year, and then they hit you with real science the second. It's a complete sucker job. But it was really a great thing. I love the whole science, because what's interesting about geology is you use very few data points, and you use a lot of creativity to try to put together the story around that, which really is what science is all about. You take observations, and then you try to build theories around observations. And geology, it was the benefit of geology was you didn't really have too many data points, so your creativity could shine. So that was it was fun. And I thought when I went to grad school that I was going to get my degree and then go work for a major oil company for 3 years, 3 years for a small private company, and then go out on my own. And I entered the industry in 1984, which is about maybe the worst time possible to get into the oil and gas industry. So I worked for these 2 old wildcatters in Houston. And it was for the first time in my life I noticed that there were guys that, they might take longer weekends or shorter days or what have you, but they loved what they did because they were trying to solve puzzles and they weren't subjective puzzles. They were very objective puzzles. You know, where does hydrocarbon exist? And if you were right, there was a good prize. Right. And they came from this long line of you know, historic Houston, you know, oilmen. And that's one thing Houston really had going for it in spades, is it's the history of the oil business is just writ large right there. And they were Stan Pindus and Clint Luth. Stan was a UT graduate. Clint Luth was the University of Wisconsin. And they were two guys that couldn't have been more different from one another. Clint was a very tall, distinguished-looking man. Could have been you know, an ambassador, always in three-piece pinstripes. And Stan was a shorter guy with a loud jacket usually, and they completely complemented one another. And they told me when I was working for them, they said, you know, always look for, because I asked them about their partnership, and they said, you know, we're a partnership because 1 + 1 = 3. We are nothing alike, and we both bring something completely different to the table. And then and they said something that I never forgot. They said, you know, most people have an affinity for people that think like they do. Mm-hmm. But then when you're in a partnership, in that case, it's 1 + 1 = 1. Mm-hmm. And that is not an effective partnership. And that's been that was a very early lesson that I learned, and it was from those guys. And I had one of the guys I founded Drillinginfo with much later on was also, he had been working at Arthur Andersen. He was a Fiji here at University of Texas, really funny guy, Bill Fowler. And Bill was wanting to be in the oil business too, because who didn't want to be in the oil business in the late 80s, right? You know, in the early 80s, because it was, you know, it was blow and go at that time.
Boom time.
Boom time. Yeah, they had the Offshore Technology Conference, which still exists today, but it's a very light facsimile of what it was back in those days. But it was compelling. Mm-hmm. But Bill was a landman. He worked for Stan and Clint, and it was so funny because Bill he drove a little Fiat, and he wore he always had an Izod shirt on and some khakis, and they sent him down to South Texas to go get a lease
with a little Fiat.
Yeah. They left it up to him as to how to do it, and he chose to wear the Izod and drive the Fiat to go get a lease from a brother and sister that were 75 or 80 years old that didn't have any vowels in their name, which is a fairly typical part of some parts of Central Texas. And he came back the next day and he said, they're not going to lease to anybody, no way, no how. And he said, I offered them the most that you'd let me do it. They told me no way they were going to lease. And so Stan and Clint got in their car. They didn't get in Clint's Cadillac. They got in Stan's Oldsmobile. And they drove down there, and they came back the next morning, and they had a lease. And Bill goes, you had to pay him more than $100 an acre for that lease, didn't you? He said, nope. He said, how'd you do it? And he goes, how much did you pay for him? And they said, it's free. Got a free lease. He stayed up all night drinking coffee with these folks and telling them that they weren't Exxon, they weren't a big company. All they could really go do is drill a well and try to drill the best well they could. And yeah, it was so much fun. I mean, learned a lot of lessons.
Lesson in negotiation, how to deal with people.
Absolutely, you know, and it's when you start really realizing that there's a lot of things that are available for a lot less, and you know, a lot of it has to do with just pride. I think that the more proud you are, sometimes the more expensive things are going to be for you. Mm-hmm. And I look at the University of Texas football team, which was going to Rice University, as was a painful thing to watch most years, except for 2 years of my whole life, maybe. And there was a coach you guys had, John Makovic. Mm-hmm. And I think he really identified the fact that if you're going to be a jerk, you better be perfect. And if you can get by with a whole lot less if you're just good to people.
Right. Well, you've gone on to do more companies, past Marathon, past this experience with Stan and Kurt. You've indeed gone on to be that entrepreneur and found some companies. Tell us about some of those.
Well, when I left Marathon in 1993, and I started a seismic company to go shoot, started a seismic crew to go do shoot to earns. And the idea, what that was taking the technology and trading it with independent operators for a piece of the deal. And that was a really exciting, interesting time. As I used to tell my dad, I said, I think I'm actually in the nonprofit world right now. That just the IRS doesn't really recognize it as such. But we shot into a whole lot of surveys from the Canadian border all the way down to the Texas border, from every size of company. And eventually it worked, but it was a long time before it did work. And it was, I learned a very valuable lesson there too, and that was, there's no such thing as a good contract with a bad person. Mm-hmm. And because I was doing deals with as many people as I could get my crew in front of, and I was taking interests in it, it was, let's face it, I was pretty naive, and there were a lot of people that really wanted to actually have a 3D survey shot on their land, and they were less enthused about paying for it in any way, shape, or form. So, then you learn the sad story of the judicial system in the United States, and I remember shooting a survey for a company down in South Texas that they didn't give us our interest, and they drilled every location that we had given them. They were successful in drilling every location, and then they wouldn't return our phone calls, wouldn't assign us our interest, and we ended up suing them. And it turns out that they were they had more lawyers on staff than they had geoscientists. And they were always being sued. So this was a professional deal for them. Mm-hmm. And the oil industry actually has a few companies like that. So it's that they deal with things from a litigious point of view than not. And they make the value determination that it's cheaper in the long term to go be sued and keep it in the courts and what have you, and then settle out at the last 3 years or 4 years later. And it was a wake-up call for me, to be a lot more careful about who I do business with.
Mm-hmm. Do you apply how careful you do business with in the same manner to who you work with, given the partnership comments earlier on?
Absolutely. I think that those are the most important decisions you ever make. And I think a lot of people make those decisions fairly flippantly. It's and not very wisely. It's those are as important a choices you make as a spouse in a lot of ways. And I think it's amazing to me to watch some of the decisions that people get made, and you learn a lot of lessons along the way. What do you look for? To me, one of the things that's really important is the golden rule. And if I find people that demand to be treated in a way differently than they are willing to treat other people, that to me, I've seen that happen a lot. And fortunately, it's not the standard. Mm-hmm. But whenever you see that just screams to me that's a person that you just don't want to do business with. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of had that recognition, then I was able to kind of avoid a lot of heartache in life.
You went on to start Drillinginfo. Tell us about Drillinginfo.
So the internet was booming, and everybody was jumping in. Every industry had some sort of plan for the internet back in the late 90s. And most of them were around, especially in the oil business, it was all about the transaction of properties. And we looked at it and said, that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, because in our industry, no real decision ever gets made without a lot of information exchanging hands and a lot of analysis taking place before you make a decision to go make a capital investment. So we decided that really what we wanted to do is build a system in which we were amalgamating as much industrial data as possible to make decisions on whether to go participate in a project or to, and from my point of view, I'd just been running seismic crews and taking deals from all over the place, and I was tired of actually depending on the people that were selling me a deal for all the supporting data as to whether this was a good deal or not. I think everybody can see that they're the moral hazard in that system right there. So it was, so to us it was like, how about third-party information allow us to go out there and identify whether we wanted to work? Because the world that we walked into was a world that unless you were a large company, you probably worked a 2 or 3 county area, and you knew it very well, and you knew all the players in it, but you didn't really work in another part of the state or in another state or what have you, and you really didn't know what was going on in those other places. So in reality, you were making a decision early on in your career, and your earnings were tied to a decision that was being made in a fairly quantifiable way. So we had the idea for Drillinginfo, and we built out the business plan for it, and I still revisit it every year because it was a business plan that had a lot of if statements. If we do this, then we can go do this, and if that happens, then we might be able to go do this. And just to cut to the quick here, if statements in a business plan, and a business plan this thick filled with if statements, is not a very fundable business plan. The financial, the VC world looks at a business plan like that, they roll their heads and they think, holy crap, how am I going to get out of this meeting? And so we had a couple of the meetings, and I realized pretty quickly that this was not going to happen on that realm. And so my friend Mark and I, we started, Mark Niblink and I, we wrote our own checks. We got a couple of other guys, Bill Fowler interested in it. Bill was a landman, Mark was a geologist, I was a geophysicist, then we brought another guy, Martin Payne, and who was a drilling engineer, and all of us were independent operators. So we came at the business from various different sides, but we'd all kind of converged. And what was nice about the small oil and gas industry is that there's no silos. If you work at Exxon, there's very big silos between being an engineer and a geologist or a land person or all the different pieces over there. And at a small company point of view, those silos disappear. And that was a big strength for us because we were able to build a system that didn't recognize these various silos. And so we weren't handcuffed by paradigms that were about 50 years old. We were kind of building something that was not, we weren't trying to go sell to major oil companies. We were trying to sell to little guys like ourselves. And interestingly enough, we made it low cost. We were trying to sell to small guys, and we percolated it up. So when we first sold to Exxon, we sold to Exxon because they called us up. Because a partner of theirs had our system and had shown Exxon how they had missed out on that they had been offset. So somebody drilled a well next to acreage that they owned, and it had cost them over $250 million, and they had no idea that had happened. And so these were tools that were made available kind of at the grassroots and percolated up. And it was the first time in the history of the oil industry that anything had really been done from a percolate up rather than a top down, getting sponsor from a major oil company and let it trickle down. So it was an interesting experiment.
So the small group of you put your checks in, probably worked for free for a while, got the business going, went to the other guys, the quote small guys like you, the big guys saw what was happening, and they started coming to you. But what was the business model you decided by that time, for Drillinginfo?
So when we started, we thought, well, we're going to just charge on a monthly basis, and we're going to just charge people by the seat. We always had this concept of a named seat, and we really liked the idea of a single instance platform. The idea being that, what I mean by that is just a multi-tenant single instance platform. A lot of people using the same instance of software. And we thought that would lend itself a lot to collaborative environments and what have you. And so part of what we were thinking was, well, we want this to be as broad as possible. Okay. We want to have a lot of people using it because if there are, then we can start leveraging that in various different ways. And we didn't have a great business plan surrounding that concept. It was more of an article of faith. Mm-hmm. But we're selling packages of seats, and we were spending the first 2 or 3 years trying to sell seats to people. And then we had modules of things that we got that we were trying to sell on top of that, and we realized that it was a lot of hard work. Yeah. Selling seats is difficult because people are always trying to buy fewer seats than more, and we wanted actually everybody in our organization to have access to it. So we changed our model and said we're going to sell on an enterprise basis, not a seat basis. And a lot of people thought we were wrong on that side because especially in the software side, on seats and what have you, people integrate under a big curve. They think, oh, well, there's 100,000 potential users, or 500,000 or what have you. And if you don't sell it on a seat basis, then you're giving up all this potential revenue. And I think at the end of the day, I looked at it and said, I don't think that that is potential revenue. I think I could sit there and create this, I think I could create the business school case so that I have this huge amount of addressable market, but I don't think we can ever get there. So to me, let's just get rid of that part and say, let's go out here and let's go sell it this way. And then the next thing we did, we started bundling things together, because we were very unsuccessful at selling modules, because these modules solved various different problems, and they were expensive, but it was a high cost to sales, and they were only valuable to people at the moment that they actually needed them. And so you were spending a lot of time running around trying to sell things to people before they actually needed it, and hope that they remembered it at the point that they needed it. And we decided, well, why don't we just cut the price of all these different pieces that we were trying to get a lot of money for, and why don't we bundle them all together and charge a small amount of money? And in the 2 years that we were selling modules, we made more money in the 6 months following that by selling it on a bundled basis for people that looked at it and said, well, wow, that's a huge value proposition, and I might not need it today, but I'll have it available to me. So that was an aha moment for me too, because that showed me that a lot of times when you get into a business, you think that it's the product that you build that's the important thing. And I've found that it's as much the business model as it is the product, and being flexible with regards to the business model as well.
And you've innovated your business model several times, and I think continue to do so today.
Absolutely. And it's really just recognizing, for instance, the oil and gas industry, we started off as a completely cloud-based SaaS business, although the word cloud and SaaS didn't exist when we started it.
Not in 1999.
In 1999. So it was like, as I told people, we're really terrible at coming up with buzzwords for stuff, but we were really good at implementing them, I guess. But it was, and kind of counterintuitively, we got much more onto on-prem software over time, because our clients are slow-moving. Everybody thinks of the oil and gas business as a very risk-taking business, and it's not. It's a very slow-moving, very capital-intensive business that is not a huge risk-taking industry. And the other aspect about it is it took us a decade, because big companies don't want to depend strategically on something that they're not convinced is going to be around a long time. So, there was all sorts of interesting things that I don't think that I was aware of when we really started it, that we became aware of over time.
You started with 4 or 5 of you. How many employees today?
We have about 600 employees today.
600 employees.
Yeah.
Those customers must like a lot of that product that you're selling under that unique business model.
Well, the beautiful part about, the markets, a free market, and what I mean by that is, it's really just the whole concept of selling something to somebody else that they want enough that they're going to pay their own hard-earned money to go get. That means you're making their life better, and you're making their life more profitable, what have you. And to me, I don't think there's anything more fundamentally powerful on earth. And Mark Niblink, the guy I founded Drillinginfo with, what's really nice is going out in the parking lot and seeing all the cars, and getting to know the kids and knowing where the colleges are going to, and realizing that something that you built is actually able to go out there and support the futures of so many people. And they're doing it in a way in which every person that works for us has a tremendous amount of pride in what they're doing. And they know that they're making other people's lives better, and they know that, and they're being compensated by people that are writing a check to say thank you. And to me, that is a nobility that is pretty amazing. We Mark and I calculated out one time, we would have had to been multi-billionaires to support as many people as we do today. And that was something that happened, from a charitable point of view. And a couple of broke guys going out and doing this are able to go do something from just a complete goodosity point of view.
Right.
That is pretty astounding. And I think that, to me, is the magic of it. And that's the part that gives me the most pride.
But if I recall, it hasn't always been quite as easy as it sounds. There was tough times there too, before Drillinginfo.
Yeah, a lot of tough times. And it was, but on the other hand, I learned so much. I'm not sure I've ever learned anything really valuable through every success. I've learned things that were completely valuable in tough times. And in fact, when I was running the seismic crew, it was horrible. I mean, the tattoo to tooth ratio of the people that worked for me were completely wrong. I learned how to identify methamphetamine addiction like that. And these are skill sets that I don't suggest for anybody to be able to develop. I could write some things about sexual harassment in the workplace that would make your hair crawl. I mean, it's just unbelievable, because I had a guy that worked for me that had been in Leavenworth for 12 years as a bank robber. So the people that you can actually entice to go work 10 and 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, living out of a cheap motel in Sublette, Kansas, they're a special breed of people. But I do, and at the end of the day, we ended up shutting that crew down 6 months after it got killed the day before Thanksgiving in '96, because one of our guys was coming back from the field, and he got in a fight with his wife on the phone. And he was an alcoholic, hadn't had a drink in 5 years. And he went into the store in Three Rivers, Texas, and he bought 3 quarts of malt liquor, and he slammed them down. He got in the company truck, and he left. And a mile out of town, he got on the highway going the wrong direction. Ooh. And a mile out of town, as he crested a rise, he hit a van, and he killed himself. He killed 2 women, he killed 3 kids, and he brain damaged a 5-year-old girl. And there's not enough insurance in the world to pay for all that. And so I was broke. I was completely dead broke. The only thing that actually saved us in the long term, saved me in the long term, was an undrilled operating interest, working interest in an oil well is considered to be a liability. So no lawyer wanted any of those. And those ended up over time coming in and producing and allowing us to go, allowing me to kind of reemerge. But I ended up getting a job working every single day for the next year on the King Ranch, processing seismic data as it came in every day, and in order to pay off the last of my bills, and I got divorced during that time frame because that wasn't really part of the deal, I guess, being broke. So,
but as you say, you learn a lot during tough times, and you never gave up as an entrepreneur. You just kept solving the problem. It may have been a different problem at the time, but you solved those issues and went on to start Drillinginfo.
Yeah, the day that I basically shut the cruise down, and on that one right over there, I remember walking outside the door of the motel in Kansas, and for the first time in about a year, I noticed the sky was really a beautiful shade of blue, and I could hear the birds chirping, and I was happier at that moment, at the really the brokest point of my life, than I had been for the time before that. And I said, I don't ever want to be in this position again. And and I think that those lessons you learn, and getting away from the things that are dragging you down, because there are certain times in life, and it's certainly in business, that you never say die, right? There are certain things in business that there's an energy to them, and you can't turn them around. They are a death spiral, and you can spend every bit of your soul trying to pull things out of a death spiral. And you know what I've noticed in life and in business and what have you is that there's a force. It's like a gravitational force, and if you can get everything kind of lined up where things are going naturally, things end up very well. When you're trying to push things in a way, your business model isn't quite right, your product isn't quite right. If you're trying to push too hard, that's telling you that there's something that's not lined up right. So spend your time trying to line it up right, and let the gravity work for you.
Oh, that's a great piece of advice. Another piece of advice, you were quoted as one of the top 2015 predictions from the Tribe rocket site was, "Fortunes are built in the down times. They're only realized in the up times." Where are we? Are we in a downtime or an uptime?
Well, for the oil and gas industry right now, this is a great opportunity. Interestingly enough, oil 3 or 4 months ago was $100 a barrel, and today, this afternoon, is $48.95 a barrel. So, on the other hand, the cost to drill a well is about 25% less than it was 3 or 4 months ago. So if it's $75, you'd be about break even to what it was 3 or 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. The other aspect about it is you can actually get into acreage positions that you couldn't get into before. There's all sorts of things. People are letting loose of things that they know they can't get around to, and that whole statement is no fortune is ever really made at the top of the market. You know, nobody went out and bought a bunch of stock at the very apex of the stock price. Nobody ever went out and bought something at the very top of the market and was able to make a fortune at it. There's my simple MBA deal right there is my dad said, he goes, well, let's see, you got a $50,000 geology degree and you got about several $1 million MBA so far. So it's like, but it was like, buy low, sell high, right? And what great advice. Right. And so in the old days, the thing that people don't realize is the operators, the people that drilled oil wells, the economics of drilling an oil well were no different at $40 a barrel than they were at $100. Mm-hmm. As the price went up, the oil field service costs went up in lockstep with that. The service industry was amazingly efficient at taking the oxygen out of the room at that point. Mm-hmm. The difference is you went from drilling wells at $40 a barrel, which you had a high likelihood that somewhere along the production stream of those wells that you drilled, that are several years long, that you had a high likelihood of maybe being twice the value of where you are right here. Right. Whereas at $100 a barrel, you didn't really actually have a whole lot of opportunity for drilling and actually having a big chunk of your production stream at twice the value of what you drilled it at. You had a much bigger chance of actually having a value half of what you drilled it at, which doesn't exist, and I think that's why I like these kind of markets today. The difference today, this time too, has been that the capital markets have reacted in a way that I've never seen them react before. In the old days, in '86 and what have you, when the price of oil cratered, the capital markets went away. There was no liquidity in the market. People that had bank debt were getting foreclosed on. There was no one there to buy anything. It was disastrous. The markets in this business froze for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden, there were multi-billion-dollar funds that were being raised for bank funds, or debt funds, to take out the bank. So the banks are sitting there looking at your collateral and recollateralizing what you have. And you're going to have to go out there, and this industry over the last few years has spent 120% of its cash flow in terms of drilling, and they've been using debt to do that. So what it's really doing is it's trading out low-cost capital for much higher, or for relatively higher cost capital for good assets. Right. And
so looking towards the future.
Yeah. And then the capital, and I can't really, the same thing that's happened with private equity with regards to private valuations of companies, to the ability of companies to grow in ways that they couldn't. It's the same thing that's happened in the oil and gas industry with regards to commodities and assets. I don't think I actually had an appreciation for how important the capital markets are in all flavors with regards to being able to go out there and allow business to very quickly change and to migrate.
So moving to the capital markets, you indeed, I think a year or 18 months ago, sold some of the stock, a small amount of stock for to a private equity firm, and if I may, at least publicly, it was $161 million worth of stock.
Yes.
Or transaction. A small part, remember guys, a small part of Drillinginfo. So tell me us about that a little bit, as you mentioned the capital markets.
So that was 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago, I guess, that we did this. It was February 3 years ago, and it was to a group out of New York. It was a growth equity group called Insight Partners, and they were able to write a check. Well, the thing that was important to me was one of my original founders had left the company, and he was looking at trying to sell some stock, and he sold some stock to a group out of Dallas who came in and immediately wanted us to go into play, get sold to a strategic or what have you. And we said, well, we'd be happy to go look at private equity folks. Our initial investors had been, no one had invested too much, but they had been very patient. We had never given any kind of dividend out or what have you, and we thought it was a good opportunity for us to go give everyone who had invested in Drillinginfo the right but not the obligation to sell some part or all of their stock. And we did a private equity offering, and it was a lot of fun. I have to say, if you're going to do it, we all agreed on the board level this would be the minimum valuation we were going to do. My insistence was, since we wanted to go forward and not sell the whole company, that I didn't want to take on any debt to go do this, so it had to be pure equity on there and no leverage, because I wanted to use all of our powder to go grow the business as opposed to subsidize somebody buying the business. Mm-hmm. And we got agreement across the board on that, so it became a lot of fun. And if we didn't have our number, then I wasn't going to do the deal, and I didn't need to do the deal. Right. So I have to say that if you're going to go out and raise private equity, or if you're going to go raise a second, and this was mostly a secondary round, do it when you don't need it. It's the most fun thing you can possibly do. I had a blast, telling John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins when he was saying, well, how much you trying to raise? And I said, I'm in the oil business and I'm a Texan, so I got to just tell you how much you got. And then having all the different groups in there, all the little minions, not wanting to know how to react to that, looking at him, and then when he starts laughing, then everybody starts laughing. I'm like, thank God he thought that was funny. I was serious though.
Right, right. But that also gave those, again, it goes back to your respect for the people, to give them an opportunity to take some of the rewards off the table for them and their families.
Anybody who invests in an idea that you have or a company that you build, you have a lot of stakeholders. Your customers are huge stakeholders, and you have to do what you need to do for your customers. Your employees are huge stakeholders, and you have to do what you're going to do, in order to basically attract and maintain your employees. I mean, those are, you can't do anything without them. And then, your investors are amazing stakeholders. And if you don't treat everybody else's money better than yours, you're screwing up. I mean, that is, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to do it again. Mm-hmm. And you want people to know that you take it very seriously. And that goes towards that whole issue of when we started the business and we raised money, we didn't pay ourselves salaries for 2 years. And and some of us were in a position to do that, and others were, it was a scrape. We loaned each other money to go do it, but we wanted to use our invested money to go out there and build a company.
That's great. I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to open the questions up to the floor. So if you have a question, please go to a microphone. You said you respect your investors essentially because you might want to do this again. Well, you're already doing it again. Don't you have another company that you're running at the same time as Drillinginfo or Vector?
Well, Vector is the oil company that I started at slightly prior to Drillinginfo. It was the oil company that I had that kind of migrated into that. We raised money for that, and And what was interesting there was I was able to go recruit people that were far better than me to go actually run that company. So and it was interesting. I'm on the board there, and I get to keep my fingers on the pulse of things, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch and help guide.
But 2 companies at the same time still is a lot of effort.
A fair amount of effort, but not as much effort as if you have really good people running them.
Right.
You know, and it really does come down to the people again.
Yeah.
Right?
It's amazing.
You know, I think Dan Graham at Build-A-Sign is a huge testament to efficient use of his time and effort and the people that he works with to be able to go do that.
Absolutely. So questions. I have many more if you guys are shy. Sir.
You spoke a little about your pricing model and things like that, but could you talk more about the product itself and was it hard to develop? Does it sell better in bad times when people are trying to really maximize what they get out of their acreage and things like that, or does it sell better when money's free in the good times and things like that?
That's a great question. I think that the product itself answers a lot of questions. It shows you how to be much more efficient. It shows how you can collapse kind of the conant of uncertainty. Somebody does something that changes the value paradigm, and it's how quickly somebody can find out about it. What we found in this time frame right over here is we see certain companies that put their heads down and don't want to do anything, and then they come in there and they want to downgrade and what have you. But for every one of those, you actually have companies that are sitting there saying, this is an opportunity for us to really figure out how to go do something. And then we've also seen a whole lot of new companies. We've seen more new names come into the industry here in the last 6 months than we've seen in the last few years. So it's complicated in that it's not one story. There's multiple stories running through this, but the value net has been positive. And I think with regards to just the product and everything has to come down to some sort of value. You know, what am I providing to my client that's creating value for them? And if that's not clear to them, then you have trouble.
Thank you. So.
I was wondering if you could go into more detail about the last company you mentioned, and also how you operate in countries where individuals don't own mineral rights.
That's a great question too. So Vecta Oil and Gas is an independent oil and gas company, and it was founded around, I had worked with the Bureau of Economic Geology. We developed a lot of patents around shear wave seismology, and we built this company around that. And the whole goal of that is to go out there and take difficult to find stratigraphic plays, identify a methodology by which to find those, go drill behind that to prove it up, and then go sell the whole play and the cookbook to a much larger company. And so we were very early on into some of the unconventionals. We were in the Wolfberry play in West Texas. We were in the Klein Shale. We've been doing a lot of things up in the Bakken and what have you. So that's the story of that company, and the revenues are spiky. You sell something and you distribute it out, and then 2 years later you do something else like that. So it doesn't have any of the criteria necessary to be a public company, but it has all the criteria to be a great private company. With regards to, what was the second part of the question?
How do you operate in countries where individuals aren't owning mineral rights?
So the way that part of our offering that we have today is we have an office in UK and an office in Southeast Asia, and then one in Houston. And we keep up with all the different exploratory blocks in the world. So exploration and development blocks, who owns them, what names do they own them under, what percentages do they have, and what are the work permits. As you mentioned, the United States is really the only country on earth. Canada has some private minerals, but the United States is the only country on earth that has private mineral rights, which has allowed there to be a huge investment in the infrastructure of the oil patch, which in fact was the thing that allowed the United States to be the leader in unconventionals, and one of the reasons that unconventionals has not taken off in the rest of the world because there really isn't the infrastructure necessary to go do that. And the other aspect about it is just is more personal, and it's really focused. Nobody believes that the people's whatever it is belongs to them. So if the minerals belong to the people, well, then you don't want them coming across your lawn, because the benefit that you're getting particularly is so small or so abstracted that it means nothing. If all of a sudden you get a check yourself for letting that happen, for them coming up and tearing up your lawn, well, then that's a completely different animal. And that's what allowed us to do a lot of things and allowing us to avoid a lot of the kind of confrontation. And I think the whole concept of private property rights has been really important with regards to the industry kind of evolving to the way that it has. And I was in Argentina speaking with the Minister of Energy in Argentina, and he had a whole bunch of people there, and I was showing them play after play in the United States where they went from no rigs or 1 rig or 2 rigs to 200 rigs in a year. Well, Argentina's never had 200 rigs run in the whole country ever in its history. And they couldn't understand how that happened. I said, you know, it's a rule of law, good contract, you know, a good set of contracts, and people waving billions of dollars around saying, hey, I need a lot of things, and they magically appear. And I said, you know, and there wasn't a single government economist involved in any one of these things. It was just magic. And then they were like, well, that could never happen here. It's like, all right.
we know what's going to happen there later then. So,
Alan, maybe you're a little too modest about a couple of the obstacles you overcame early in Drillinginfo. From my perspective, I'd like to throw them out and get your comments on. One was that you were engaged in a big data mining exercise in the, you know, kind of behind the scene. You've talked about the web and software, but you had a big data mining thing. And you were trying to get data from state agencies that were actually not the best or easiest place to get data. So I'd like your comments on that. And the second thing was, you were entering what seems to me a competitive space that already had a giant company called IHS in it.
Yep.
Or maybe you didn't see them as in their competitive space. So maybe you could comment on those.
Well, that's great points both. So certainly the whole concept of government access to information is not as clean a situation as people might think. There is a whole lot of cleaning that has to go on, and it's very difficult to deal with a lot of the politics of accessing information. But today we collect information from about 400 different sources. We take paper records in large cases and digitize 10,000 pages a day of information to go into these, and it was building out these processes one at a time. It was quite difficult, and doing it in a variety of different areas where there was not a consistency from county to county or even state to state with regards to how to even deal with it. And you know, some of the things that we ran into, for instance, we have 150 courthouses that are digital on our system right now. So the reason we have the courthouses is so that you can see what the deed references are when you're going out there to try to see who to lease it from or what have you. And a whole bunch of them are back to sovereignty. Well, going out and scanning everything in a courthouse is a massive job. It costs for each courthouse over $1 million to get it scanned and then get it indexed. And the courthouse doesn't want you there. And they can do all sorts of things to keep you from being in there. You know, like you only have 10 minutes in there, or they're going to charge you. At one time they said that they were, you know, if we took a photograph or scanned something, I had to pay them $1. You know, it was all sorts of things that they would throw out there to go do that. And at the end of the day, I started realizing was they weren't going to go to the digital age themselves because the diner across the way depended on people coming into town to go to the courthouse, and the motel and this thing. You know, there's a lot of different constituencies out there that don't want tax dollars spent to go out there and make the world an easier place to live in, because you know there's a lot of lifestyles that are supported by inefficiency. And then we did, there is a company called IHS, was a combination of a company called Petroleum Information and Dwight's that combined together. And the Federal Trade Commission basically ordered them to divest one license because they thought it was they didn't want one company being the sole repository of U.S. Oil and gas information. And we were able to acquire that from the people that actually acquired it to begin with. They had spent $30 million trying to bring a product to the market and never were able to, and we acquired that in 2004. But the way that we compete, I don't believe in going out and competing against 900-pound gorillas straight over tackle. I mean, that's a great way of just getting murdered, and I watched it over and over. It was how do you actually provide a different value so that it's not really taken you can go in and I call it putting the camel's nose under the tent. How do you provide a different value proposition than the 900-pound gorilla that allows you to get in there because you're solving an important problem, even if a lot of the what you're providing overlaps with what they do. But then build on your strengths, and then over time, you start building these out. They came at the world from the concept of being a data provider. And we came at the world looking at the data that we were collecting as being nothing more than the fuel or the engine to power answers for people. And that's really, I think, the differential we came in, because originally we were a black box. You couldn't actually get at the data underneath our system. You could just get at the answers that we would give you. And so these were powerful answers for people to utilize. And then over time we opened it up so that we became more competitive with them, for people to be able to pull that information out and use it in various different systems.
That's fabulous. I hate to say this, but we have actually come to the end of our time. But this has been fascinating. Lots of lessons to be learned here, Alan. Thank you for sharing. Not least of which, you were the SaaS business model before we talked about SaaS, software as a service. You were involved in big data before we called it big data. You talked about the business model and not the business plan before we were still reading those big documents. And finally, amongst the many other things I've learned tonight, is a new rating for the people I look to hire. I have to make sure that the tattoo to tooth ratio is correct. Alan, thank you very much.
Thanks.